talk about breaking evil patterns today. What does that mean? I'm talking about patterns that are in your environment that affect you, and also patterns that are inside that you may or may not be aware of. What can you do about that? So the first thing I wanted to do is I want to tell you a story. I live in a small Canadian town in the prairies. My day is mostly research and work. I go out occasionally just to run errands. In the course of those errands, I meet people. Often they become friends. And there is a young lady I know. She's in her early 20s. Lovely lady. Very creative. A little bit quiet if she doesn't know you. Just beautiful of heart. Kind of like one of those radiant spirits that you run across. You know, she's concerned. She's concerned about how other people are doing and how they're feeling. And she's creative, so she likes to write. She likes to do poetry, that kind of stuff. And you know, in our life, sometimes we run across people that we just get an intrinsic sense that generally they're a good person. And it's nice to know that there are people out there that, you know, want to make a difference, you know, and they make a difference in their local community. So I, on a somewhat regular basis for a while, would go into a place of business, conduct transactions, and then she'd be there with her friends, you know, many of which were also young females. And every time I went in, always treated me like gold. I always felt like I was lifted, you know, just like happy people, like, you know, the kind of people that you would see in, you know, midsummer that were just joyous outside enjoying themselves, you know, that kind of scenario. And then over time, sometimes I would notice that when I would go in, I would, like I say, I was always treated well. But sometimes when I would go in, I would notice that there was an atmosphere that seemed a little bit down and not so happy. And so, you know, as I became friends with some of the people there, this person told me that I asked them, you know, how were things going, and she just said that, you know, she was becoming weary because a kind of sort of heaviness had come into the atmosphere, and it was, you know, affecting people's, you know, moods and that sort of thing, and so it was difficult, challenging to deal with. And so I said to her, I said, well, you know, could we do a little thought experiment? And so she said, sure. And I said, if you were able to visualize, you know, what that energy was, that was a downer, what would it look like to you? And she thought for just a few seconds, and then right away she came back and she said, oh, well, it looks like a Dementor from Harry Potter. You know, one of the things I appreciate, you know, she seems to me well read. She's a Harry Potter fan, but the image that she shared really struck me, and the reason that it struck me was because I think it was a day or two before I was in some kind of conversations with people where that kind of imagery had come up. And, you know, there's people in town that I know that are going through different things, and also abroad, you know, so I get a lot of feedback. And I think one of the things that's happening is that there is like a growing, you know, sort of sense of the ominous, you know, pressure, etc. I did a video before this one. It didn't come through. I'm going to try to cover everything I did in that one. But what I wanted to share with you in this video is that there are ways to break evil patterns. And, you know, one thing that's important to understand is that evil, to a degree, can be described as an information pattern. It's asymmetric. In other words, it tends to lack symmetry. It's entropic. So it's a negative kind of chaos that leads to a degenerative, disharmonious state. So one of the things that I've done in my group is I've developed frequencies called DISPELL darkness. They've been used for years. They're probably one of the more popular sets. They've been utilized by professional paranormal investigators in field, and we've had some pretty dramatic results from that. In the comments section below, you'll find links where you can find out more about DISPELL darkness. You know, there's a lot of content on our older legacy site, but you can find out more about it there. And then the other thing is we did a webinar back for, it was a small special interest group within our greater group. This is something that they were interested in, so I put it together. I didn't heavily promote it because I figured it was really something special that would really only be for a select few. And I appreciate, you know, we have different people that follow my work, business class, you know, alternative healer, you know, groups, you know, people that follow astrology, and, you know, they know that I'm not a traditional astrologer, but they're interested in the take that I have on things. You know, I try to come at it from a more scientific perspective. But this webinar focused on what's the hidden spot in the psyche. You know, where is that blind spot? You know, that darkness or evil might come through, and it tends to be different for different people. So in that webinar, you know, we step people through how do you discover this, what are its qualities, how can it be best managed. Now, those are two tools that I suggest that you check out. One of the things I do is I run my frequencies on a regular basis in my home, and so I run the DISPELL darkness frequencies throughout the day, and it's interesting to just note the effects. You know, we have a pretty intense full moon today, and it's going to be both, you know, it's going to have both challenging and positive aspects to it. But one of the things that I do is I pump the house with this stuff acoustically or through a large coil. We use about a 170 watt audio amp, and, you know, sometimes I crank it. But when there's a bad storm brewing and there's, like, you know, psychological and psychic residue floating about the atmosphere from collective misery, and if it's punctuated by something like a full moon and I know this coming in advance, I like to, it's kind of like battening the ship down, you know. We get the house pumped full of frequencies, and it's remarkable the difference that it makes. I can definitely tell when it's being used or not, like a buffer. So, you know, if I'm safe in the house with everything running, and then I go out to maybe do some, you know, business or get some groceries, just noticing the difference in people around me. But that's one tool that you can check out. And then the other thing is, with the webinar, even if you don't have a background in astrology, what it does is it takes you step by step through discovering what that blind spot is, and then how to deal with it. And it's very specific in how it describes that. You don't have to have a background in astrology to follow that. It's really the ideas behind it that I think will be of service. The reason that's important is because as the collective mind goes more manic into more mania, if you know the conduit in your own psyche that you're most vulnerable towards a negative influence is, and then how to manage that, chances are on average you're going to be ahead of the game. So those are two things. Now the other thing I want to talk about really quick, and I can't remember if I talked about it in the rest of the video, I think it's at the end. You need to evaluate your daily routine. It's great if you've got tools that can help you through, but if you want to have like consistent change and have a much better chance of getting to where you want to go, they're organic. Yes, I know I'm coughing. I've just been working a lot. I wanted to get this out for you guys. That's my bad habit that's got to go, right? But when it comes to your daily routine, how you're sticking to it, and one of the interesting things about the webinar is that you also learn about cyclic activity. If we all have a shadow low form of our conscious self that we don't want in control, it can be handy having an idea as to when it's going to be more active and when it will be sleeping. Because one of the ways you use that information is you try to figure out when do you have to make critical decisions and take actions, and when are you not going to be impeded by that kind of shadow part of yourself. And then if you know in advance when the shadow part of yourself is likely to emerge, you get ready for it and you bag it as soon as its head raises, and you basically, you know, you put it back in its cage. So those are two things that I suggest. Comment section, links below, check that out. The rest of the video we're going to talk about similar things, but I just wanted to redo this first part. I find myself in sort of a strange situation sometimes, and that is that while members in my group who've followed my work for some time are probably really familiar with just what our take on things are. I know that there's a number of people that follow us to different degrees, and they may have only heard bits and pieces, or they may not have heard it at all about, you know, some of the things that we do, you know, what our philosophy is, that sort of thing. But one of the things I run into a little bit of challenge with sometimes is, because I'm operating in an alternative health type arena, you know, you're always exposed to people with different backgrounds, which is generally a good thing. You know, usually it's complementary. But I think sometimes in any community there's an expectation that all individuals will conform to what seems to be a kind of generalized, you know, projected or induced mindset as to who are we, what do we believe, why are we here, etc., etc. And, you know, I've been somewhat of an outsider there because I don't really buy into certain ideologies, and in my work and in, you know, our group's experience, there's an encouragement on, you know, actually trying to do something that's measurably, demonstrably positive. So you're actually in a better space. You know, one of the things I don't like is when there's too much positivity for the sake of positivity, you know, being spoken about, where it's like, you know, law of attraction overdrive into craziness. And yet I'm in a, you know, funny position, because it's like, from the work that I do and the approach that we take, the goal and the point is to try to get a person into a positive state. There is a concern about maintaining that kind of state, but we differentiate. And one of the ways that we differentiate is there has to be less of magical thinking and, you know, wishful, you know, hopeful thinking, and more, you know, retaining you know, hopefulness, retaining a positive state, but then having a sense of certainty that you're actually going in a direction that has a measurably higher probability of self-improvement, being better, feeling better. And so that's kind of where I think the rubber hits the road on that. What's important right now, as many of you have noticed, is that this crazy, I think largely manufactured catastrophe, I think it's been purposely engineered to act like a transform or a transformation. And, you know, there's different ways to view this. Like in judo, you have this principle called kazushi. And so, you know, kazushi is using the opponent's weight and momentum against them. You see it in different kinds of engineering and physics, where you're using like a leverage and a fulcrum, where you're moving, you know, a very large, heavy object with relative ease and not so much effort. So we're talking about a pivot point. And so I think what's been going on is that, you know, you can control people through fear. And, you know, when that happens, there's a transform. There's a change in inertia, in gravitation, in focus, certainly in perceptual experience and awareness potentially. And so what that transform does is it takes things that were latent or beneath the surface, that were kind of bubbling. A lot of families, a lot of countries, a lot of communities, you know, from what I've seen, often have a kind of hidden, you know, neurotic layer that's woven by the repeated mistakes of generations. And with luck, they also have a very strong resilience, you know, virtuous core. And so you've always got that interplay, and you hope that the virtue and the higher principle and the care and the love, this wins out. But what happens in a situation like this is that it's like a judo move that's been done on someone unsuspecting, and now they're flying through the air, and their potential for injury is increased. You know, and I was talking with a buddy the other day just about how many divorces have happened within the last year or two. Like, it's just gone way up. So when we're managing evil, two things have been very handy and convenient within the SOS community. So one is a tool that by its inherent nature imparts a pattern that diffuses and dissolves, basically asymmetric evil patterns. I'm describing this kind of simply. And so the idea is that the pattern then, the spiritual, inspiring, coherent pattern gets put into the body and mind, and things happen. Good things. Sometimes dramatic things. And then the other thing is self-awareness. And what I mean by that is that in the comments section below, you'll find a list of resources that are related to what I'm talking about. But one of the things that we've found is that typically, again, as a generality, for the individual, evil, the experience of something evil, tends to come in through a certain kind of conduit. And that conduit is it's like a blind spot in the psyche. It's like a part of your psyche that you may be somewhat aware of on the periphery, but there's something in the closet there. And that when the evil, on average, tends to come through, it's going to come through that blind spot, that hole. And so one of the things that's helpful is to, as much as possible, hunt that sucker down, find out what's in that hole, and then do what you can to root it out, neutralize it, manage it. And the interesting thing about that is that the energy that comes through that blind spot does tend to be cyclical. One of the things that I do in my home is that I run a very specific set of frequencies with regularity when I know that the atmosphere is not doing so well. So that could be, like today we have a pretty intense full moon. There's some good things about it, and there's some challenging things about it. But sometimes you just have like a dark window of time and space. And what I tend to do is, when I know that's coming up, I crank that. I let it run the whole day. And it makes a difference. It's very strange for me to go out in my community and realize that at least it seems to appear that I'm the most calm, stable one that I'm going through. It's not to say that everybody is agitated all the time, but it's just interesting seeing that difference. And when I come home, how calm and stable it feels. And I don't attribute it all to the frequencies, but I do notice one heck of a difference during critical times when they're playing versus not. And I'll play them either as acoustic frequencies, because then they really soak in, or I'll broadcast them through like one of our strong silent emitters. And for the home broadcast, what I'll usually do is I'll use an audio amp. I think it's about 170 amp, and I'll crank it sometimes, so it's it's resonating pretty well throughout the house. But the other thing is, we did a webinar sometime back. We did it for a specific set, a subgroup of our overall group, and it was well received. They liked the content. But the nature of that webinar is exactly about discovering specifically where the blind spot is. This is information that I suggest you review and access because of what's happening now and what's going to be happening, certainly over the next year. Knowing where the vulnerability is and then being able to do something about it, or at least have an idea as to how to do something about it, it's going to be super helpful. So now the other thing is the frequencies that I use to try to break up that kind of evil atmosphere. Those are the DISPELL darkness frequencies. We've had some pretty, it's one of our most popular sets. It's been used by a really wide range of people. We've had some pretty intense stories from people that are professional, like paranormal investigators that are known, they have their own presence out there. They actually do that for a job. And some of the in-field case studies and the reports that we got back from them were not going to go into too much of the details about the DISPELL frequencies. Basically, if you want to read more about that, just see the comment section below. There's some older pages, there are legacy pages on our site, so you can review that. The webinar, the reason that it's helpful is that it gives instructions, and there's a few hours of content there. And there is a strong astrology component to it. But again, for those of you that have followed my work, you know that I'm not coming at it from the approach of a typical traditional astrologer. So in that webinar, what it does is it helps you figure out exactly, even if you don't have an astrology background, where that blind spot, where that hole is. And then it also, step by step, directs and instructs you on how to understand specifically how that will manifest, like in the sense of qualities, examples, that sort of thing. And so forewarned is forearmed. I think that there's two paths through the chaos that we're in now and that's coming up. One's going to be the path of the individual, and then the other is going to be the path of the collective. And the collective generally is going to have a very rough ride, and it's not going to lead any place that you really want to be. The path of the individual, much more hopeful. I know a lot of people have been losing their jobs. The economy is looking bleak. And there's just, we're constantly terrorized daily by the media generally. And it's just, it's a shit show. So what I want to see happen here is you being in a situation where not only can you survive this, but you're able to leverage your life and your circumstances in such a way where you get on the path that leads to someplace good. And it is there. And I don't want to, I'm in a funny situation because I have business clients where my goal is always to try to figure out how can I advise them so that their interests are secured and profitable, but still be able to warn them of stresses coming up. And I think that the best way is to not over amplify and highlight just the fear and just the bad things, but you have to, present it so that they're aware of what the potentials are, but also make, an equal, if not, greater effort to spotlight what the opportunities and what the positive things are. And they are there. It's not going to be easy, but they're there. And one of the things that's important is, what is your daily routine? So I can say to you, hey, here's some frequencies I made, they might make you feel better. And I could say in honesty that we have a very good track record with them. The fee is quite small in relation to the effects that most people experience. And I can say to you, look, here's a webinar, get this webinar, watch this webinar, you'll be more informed. But neither of those things are going to probably make enough of a consistent long-term difference unless something in your day-to-day changes. So that, these would be tools that you can use, but you still have to find the will. You still have to have the will and the follow-through, to allow those changes to be made and to keep them in place. And one of the ways that we do that is routine. So, I think it's a pretty safe bet that all of us, myself included, we can always improve what our daily routine is. But the reason that it's so important is that each day is like a musical note in a chord of musical notes that's part of a larger song. And that song could be, your week, it could be the month, it could be the year. But every single time, you're in a situation where you're able to, as much as possible, consciously select the right tone, the right, the right beats, the right harmony for the moment of experience in your routine daily, the more likely the overall song's going to just sound and feel better. So one of the ways that we should approach that is you look at, how much disposable time you have in your day, how much power do you have over, being able to structure or restructure your day, and then make a dedicated effort, with the tools at hand to try to create a better rhythm, a better routine And you know that it'll be better at the end of the day because over time, and I think that for most of you, you should notice this easily within a week, at least a week. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to rest more. You'll feel better physically. And most importantly, by keeping a routine that's appropriate for you, you'll see progress. And one of the things that's important in all of this is your sense of hope that is grounded. And when you look at progress that you make in a meaningful part of your life at the end of the day, even if it's small, that it adds up. And you'll see yourself improving probably much more rapidly and much more meaningfully than you might have imagined. So I would encourage you, like I say, I'll try to get more content up. April's going to be a bit of a weird month. I know I haven't reported for a couple of months on what's going on. The main reason, again, like I said, is research, but also there's so many things. There's so much activity happening on the world stage, in the sky. It's a lot to keep up with. I greatly appreciate the support. Every time I put something out, you guys are always very receptive and supportive. Thank you. I appreciate that. I will try to get back to you on April, but really, really quick. One of the things my mentor said was that there's going to be a dichotomy, not a bad one, between the male and female energy. And so the male energy is like the navigator in April, and is kind of behind the scenes. And then the female energy is more like, the public, spokesperson, in the public spotlight. And we're all made of male and female energy, like we have that inside of us. So this will be, man and women, but it will also be the sides of self. And so for you, what you want to do is nurture both, allow for both, but don't get caught up in any kind of social pressure, because that'll be huge in April. And stay true to your ideals. All right, so I hope this helps you. So we've got 3 things here to look at, 2 of which are tools. You can find out more about that in the comments section below. And then the third thing is make sure that you scrutinize your routine, and as much as you can, try to keep that constant.